Okay, hello, John Dove here from the Advocacy Club, and we've just had our November meeting of the legal session, and tonight our members have been involved in speed moots. So our members tonight were involved in a moot that related to a special reasons case following a drink driving charge. So it was quite an interesting problem tonight. I'm going to talk to you about mooting generally and some sort of tips for mooting, and then just some sort of general presentation tips at the end. So the first point I'm going to make is that when it comes to mooting, what we're doing here, we've got a scenario here. We've got a fact pattern, which is by and large agreed between both appellant and respondent. So as the mooter, it's all about how you can take the law, apply that to the scenario, and ultimately advocate those points. So it all starts with the research. Now, thankfully tonight, you haven't had to do any research or any drafting. All of the case law has been included for you. So what you're doing is you're reading through that case law and looking at how you can apply that. So when you are reading through the cases, if you've got something that particularly is particularly helpful to your argument, to your submissions, well, it's all about how well you use that law and how well you can present that, how you put those points across. And it could be, to really hammer it home, you might look through, you might find specific quotes from within those helpful judgments that you can sort of incorporate into your arguments to really buttress your points. If, on the other hand, you're going through and you're finding cases that aren't particularly helpful, it might be a seminal case that flies in the face of your argument and really supports your opponent's point. Well, it's how you deal with that case law. And generally speaking, there's two things you can do. Firstly, you can try and distinguish any case law that goes against you. So if you can try and say, well, the fact that the principle that was established in that case very much applies to the fact pattern from that scenario. And if you can find a way that you can sort of distinguish the fact of your case to the point that you can say, well, it's not really applicable, isn't really on all fours, that's one way you can go about it. Or alternatively, you can search through, some of the dissenting judgments or maybe some points that are made as part of the sort of obiter within the judgment that might be helpful for you. So it's all about how you can try and use that case law and incorporate that into your argument. Whenever you are referring to any case law within your submissions, each time you mention a case, you might want to just say to the judge or ask the judge whether they want a summary of the facts from the case that you're going to cite. It's just a courteous way of bringing courteous thing to mention to the judge, I should say. More often than not, the judge might not want to know the facts of the case you're citing, because they may well have read it beforehand, or it might be that it's not particularly relevant. So quite often a judge might say, are the facts going to be relevant to the point you're making? If you're citing a case because you're saying, well, it's so similar and therefore, the same principle will apply, then absolutely you might want to mention some of the facts briefly. If you're simply seeking to rely upon a legal principle established from the case and the facts are not particularly relevant, you may want to mention that to the judge. The facts aren't relevant. I'm just seeking to rely upon the principle that's being established there. Whenever you are going to cite a case that you've mentioned within your bundle, and particularly if you're going to be quoting from a judgment, tell the judge exactly where they can find that within the bundle. So I'm going to quote from the case of X and Y, and I'm quoting Lord Justice Smith. This can be found on page 5 of the bundle, paragraph 4, line 3, from the word and, something like that, just so the judge can find it exactly, and wait for the judge to find that point that you're going to be quoting. Because if you start quoting that while the judge is still flicking through a bundle, scrolling an online bundle, whatever it might be, they're not listening to the point you're making. So whenever you're going to cite from your bundle, from a case, make sure the judge has found the point, you're happy they found it, and then move on from there. When it comes to mooting, quite often it can be judicial intervention that can make the difference, particularly when you get to really high level mooting And it's very, very difficult for a judge to pick between two mooters as to who was the better, who performed better in the moot. Sometimes it can literally come down to who responded in the best way to judicial intervention. So when you are, well, firstly, responding to judicial intervention starts before you even enter the moot room. It all starts with your preparation. So if you've prepared your case properly and you've looked through it, you'll know where the weaknesses lie and where the strengths lie in your opponent's case. And you know that is very much, that is very much where the questions are going to come from. That is what these are the points that the judge is going to rely upon to sort of put questions to you. So you can have a good guess beforehand as to what, where these questions are going to come from, what the questions are going to relate to. So you can take some time to think about how you might respond to those questions. So once again, it might be that, that the judge is going to be asking you about the key case. How can you distinguish that? Something along those lines. But have a good think beforehand about where the weaknesses lie and how you're going to answer those questions. And that means that the bulk of the questions that come your way, you should be able to predict or at least know the sort of general themes. This video is brought to you by Speed Mooting. We are an organisation that help aspiring and junior lawyers. We run online and in-person advocacy and mooting competitions. We do online advocacy and public speaking training, and we run lots of other events to assist people on their legal journey. To learn more, visit our website, speedmooting.com. When you do receive a question by way of judicial intervention, don't feel the need to jump in right away. You can always take a pause beforehand, have a sip of water. It's a good sort of stalling tactic. A bit of a filler phrase. My lady asks an interesting question, and the way I would deal with it is as follows. You've bought yourself a few seconds just to have a think. Because it's very easy to jump into an answer and then realize halfway through you're going down the wrong rabbit hole. You should have answered it another way. So always take a few seconds just to have a little think beforehand. When it comes to the structure of how you would deal with your submissions, as you can imagine, it's not rocket science. It's like any other form of presentation: introduction, main part, conclusion. No need to reinvent the wheel. It's pretty much the same for mooting as it would be for almost any form of presentation you can imagine. So within your introduction, start with the courtesy. May it please the court, I appear on behalf of the appellant. Quick sentence or two, particularly in a speed like this where you've only got 7 minutes, just to say, just to set out in very brief terms what the points are you're going to be making. If you've got 3 points, well, I'll be making 3 points, which are X, Y, and Z. You're then going to move on into your sort of main body. And the nice thing is you've got a skeleton argument there. Now, if this was a sort of full moot where you've drafted the skeleton argument yourself, you'd probably follow it through in that order. With this speed mooting style where we prepared the skeleton argument for you, you might think, well, do you know what? I don't quite like the order in which that's been prepared. I would rather go 4-3-2, whatever. That's fine. You can rejig it, particularly for this where we've sort of pre-drafted the skeleton argument. You may want to just tell the judge that in advance and say, I'll be dealing with my submissions in this order, and work through them. Use the skeleton argument as your guide as you're going through. And each time you move on to a new point, signpost it with the judge, tell the judge, I'll now be dealing with the point regarding whatever, which my lord can find at paragraph 3 of the skeleton argument. As with any form of presentation, you move on to your end, your conclusion, your summary, etc. And once again, just summarize the key points. And then your final sentence will be, and for these reasons, I invite your lordships to allow the appeal. And then once again, a very sort of courteous line at the end, unless I can assist any further. So the structure, as I say, it's nothing groundbreaking. It's like anything else. You tell someone what you're going to say, you tell them, and you tell them what you've just told them. Now, in terms of presentation tips, I'll come back to the big tip that I give to everyone every single week, but it's no less important: speak slowly. If you're anything like me, you probably speak quite quickly in day-to-day life. When it comes to a moot, when it comes to any form of advocacy or submission, make sure that you're speaking slowly. So as a general rule, 100 to 120 words per minute is sort of on the money for a good pace. And it's important because A, it allows the judge to follow what you're saying, which is particularly important if you were in a mooting competition, because you want them to follow your content and be persuaded by what you're saying. And once again, this leads me into my next point, which is a person who speaks slower sounds more persuasive. Because when you speak at 5 million miles an hour, you sound flustered, you sound confused. And once again, if points are missed, they can't be persuasive. So speaking slowly has the benefit of making you a more persuasive advocate. Try and avoid reading word for word from a script. Now, there's nothing wrong with, alongside your skeleton argument, you might type out a full script alongside that. That is absolutely fine. Try and practice it a few times. Try and practice, as many times as you possibly can in reality, but I would say at least sort of 5, maybe 10 times, because when you practice something like that, the points that you're trying to make, they become embedded in your brain, and it becomes like muscle memory each time you present. And that means that you start to present more dynamically. It comes out slightly differently, rather than sort of either trying to remember something word for word or even reading something word for word when it comes out quite wooden. And once you've practiced so many times, you could then almost rely upon your skeleton argument as sort of a helpful guide for you. So that, there's nothing wrong with looking down to your skeleton arguments and going, okay, now going to move on to point 4. You remember what that is, and then you can go from there. And of course, each time you know that you're going to be quoting directly from a judgment, for example, you'll of course be looking down and reading at that point. But for the most part, try and practice so that you can sort of deliver dynamically. And of course, most importantly, maintain eye contact with the judge, builds the rapport, and once again, feeds back into your persuasion. In terms of the style of the voice as well, be yourself. You hear people talk about this bar voice and thinking they need to sound a certain way. You don't. Be yourself, be authentic, because it comes across when you're trying to be something you're not. So if you've got an accent, don't worry, don't panic about that. Speak in your own style. When you speak slower anyway, it will naturally sort of change your voice, and it'll help you. You're going to come across quite well anyway. So don't worry about trying to change your style, trying to pretend to be something else. Don't. Be authentic, and that's how you can be persuasive. And then just a final point is, when you are making a point, avoid using the phrase "I think, I believe," because you're not there to think or believe. You're there to present legal arguments. So if you do need to, throw some sort of filler in at the start of a sentence, go with "I submit" or "It is my submission that," because that's what you're doing. You're submitting, you're not thinking. So I hope that those tips have been helpful for you.
Enjoying our videos? Then we'd be super grateful if you could take a moment and subscribe to our channel.